everybody.
Are
Ron?
you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Uh, I hope you enjoyed Jimmy Buffett again. It's always nice to sit and listen to him. Uh, I wanted to tell you that because of the first and second classes that were canceled, we will be continuing. So we will have classes on November 7th and November 14th to make up for what we lost. Um, Also, I was told that the Zoom did not work last week and nobody could hear it. So I'm going to very quickly go over just the introduction that explains the geography of Key West, um, so that those people who are on Zoom will be able to understand that. So starting with that, as you drive south, leaving Florida City and entering Monroe County for 11 or 13, 113 miles, 113 miles from Florida City to Key West on US Route 1. That road links all the Keys, the Atlantic Ocean, the Florida Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. And you will cross the 7-mile bridge over turquoise water on your way to Key West, which ends at the end of the US 1 highway. And that's at the southernmost point, which you may have seen the thing. What is that? A buoy, I guess, at the end. But and at any rate, you will enter Key West with which has an unmatched vibrancy. It's audacious and spirited, with a diversity of people and civic problems, where everyone is accepted and no one is ostracized. And that's really true. So, as hostess of the cable TV show County Line with June Girard from 1991 to 2001, I had the unique opportunity to meet and question the famous, the powerful, and immensely talented characters that I'm happy to share with you through these recordings that are 20 to 30 years old, but they're still relevant. So let me tell you a little bit about the slave trade. And investors in the slave trade were principally European royalty from England, France, Spain, the Netherlands, and Portugal. And European nobility and the leading merchants were also serious participants in the slave trade. The remains of this particular slave trader ship, which was sunk 30 miles west of Key West in 1700, gives viewers a glimpse into the life on the ship, departing from a London port and continuing the voyage to West Africa and Jamaica. Records indicate that the Henrietta Marie went down shortly after she was offloaded a cargo of 190 enslaved Africans in Jamaica. The Henrietta Marie was the only slave shipwreck in the Western Hemisphere ever identified by name, and it was the most complete slave ship ever found. She was capable of carrying up to 120 tons of cargo and 250 slaves. The artifacts uncovered in this unprecedented find were subsequently donated to the nonprofit Mel Fisher Museum. When Mel Fisher found the Etosha as a scavenger, the state of Florida claimed the $1.1 billion of plundered and indigenous treasures because the ship was found in Florida waters. Fisher objected and hired a local Key West attorney, Dave Horan, who represented him before the United States Supreme Court. The court ruled in favor of Mel Fisher and all future salvages, allowing them to keep their treasures. and that brought great wealth to Key West as well as to the Salvagers, but none has brought the great wealth of the Etosha. In this video, there are times when you will hear background narration as well as African voices in the slavehold, and you will see a picture of the actual wreck Mel Fisher's divers discovered, and a bell inscribed the Henrietta Marine 1699. And that is where our tour begins. We should have some sound. Oh. We're not getting our tour. Here we go. Those, those are people. Okay. I think Madeline Burnside, who was the director of the museum at the time and conducted that tour, unfortunately, we were listening to other tours going by as well, so it was probably difficult to hear. But if you ever go to Key West, you need to go to the museum and see these things. It's an amazing story uh, of the only slave ship that's been totally found, plus the fact that you get to see how they put the Africans in the hold of the ship so close together. And that was a long journey, days and days and maybe months across the ocean that they had to live that way. Anyway, any questions? All right, well, I'm going to move on to our author today, and who is Lynn Nicholas. And she was born in New London, Connecticut, and she was educated in the United States, England, and Spain. She received her BA from Oxford University. After her return to the United States, she worked at the National Gallery of Art. She began research on her book, The Rape of Europa, in the 1980s, and it was published in 1994. Oh, yes. Lynn came to Key West because her mother lived there. And so when I found out that her daughter was there, I invited her to be on the program. Her book won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was subsequently made into a TV movie, which you may have seen, about the art in Europe and the Nazis. And the story of the fate of Europe's treasures in the Second World War is a scholarly work that reads like an adventure story. So we'll look to that interview with Lynn Nicholas on the Rape of Europa. This is County Line. I'm June Gerard. Welcome to our show. This evening we're talking with the author of The Rape of Europa, Lynn Nicholas. Lynn, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
This is not new for you. You've been on CNN a couple of times. You've had some very interesting interviews. We're going to tell our audience pretty soon about The Rape of Europa and what that is. But before we do, I want to know a little bit about Lynn Nicholas and where you went to school.
Well, my father was a naval officer, a career naval officer, and one of the places I went to school, of course I went to a lot of schools, was the convent right here in Key West, Mary Immaculate Star of the Sea. And it was the wonderful old convent building then with all the shuttered doors, which unfortunately I guess has been torn down, and very strict nuns, and it was a very good education. And we particularly liked it when Truman came, because then we got to go and look through the fence and see him go by and wave little flags sometimes. But I went there for I think 3 years, first, second, and third grade. So it was a very formative part of my life, and that's actually why I come back, because my mother comes back and takes the house every year, and I come with her, and she sees old friends. So I'm a sort of a, sort of a conch, I guess that's what you say.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Well, you also have gotten into a writing career, and would you like to tell us how you did that?
Well, I had a bunch of kids, and I tried working full-time, and that was quite difficult. So I started doing research on this subject of art being taken during the war. And the way I got into it was that my jobs had all been at museums, so I was very interested in the art world. And I did a lot of research for years, and then finally someone said, well, look, why don't you better write this down. And so I started writing it, and then, it turned into a book, and so here I am.
Well, we have given a clue as to what The Rape of Europa is.
and it deals with art throughout the world at that time. What's amazing to me is that, I knew that the victors had, picked up art and taken it back and that kind of thing. I had no idea that we actually had a task force in our Army devoted to saving our art. Or the other things. Tell us a little about that.
Well, we almost didn't have that because, of course, the government then, the same as is the case right now, they didn't want to spend money on recovering works of art. I mean, so there took a lot of doing. All the museum directors in the United States got together and they put pressure on Roosevelt and everybody because they knew from their European colleagues that the Nazis had been taking private collections and some things from public collections in Western Europe and tons of stuff from every kind of collection in Eastern Europe, and they knew that come the end of the war something would have to be done with these things. And and we're not talking about one or two works of art, but there were literally millions of things that were moved from coins and books to paintings and little mice and figurines and everything you can possibly think of. I think really basically almost every work of art in Europe was moved from the place where it should be to some other place, and the people in our army and Russian army and actually the German army had officers who were supposed to take care of works of art, and they all did an incredible job and did eventually get most of it back where it belongs, but not all of it.
No, but it was really an incredible job of record keeping.
Unbelievable.
And you had to have done years of research to follow all of these different paintings.
Well, luckily for us, the Nazis were very good record keepers, and after the war, the American armies took over their records, and a lot of those are in the National Archives in Washington, which is where I live. So I would go down there day after day and read through this stuff, and it's like reading a mystery story. It's like Indiana Jones or something. Just absolutely amazing what they did, and because they had kept these records, it was possible for our army to find things and figure out where they'd hidden things.
Well, I remember reading about the Night Watch. Do you want to tell us what they did with that during the war?
Well, the Night Watch, countries like Holland and France, when they knew the invasion was coming, they started putting their very best works of art into hiding places. And the Night Watch was in Amsterdam in the Rijksmuseum, and it's a very big painting. I think it's about huge. 10 by 5, or maybe
no,
8 by more than that, 20 by 12.
Yes,
it's huge. And so they took it down and they put it on a carpet. I have actually a news photograph of this on an oriental rug, and they rolled it up and they put it in storage, and it looks just like a huge roll of paper towels or something. And they put it in a castle sort of near the dunes. And then when the Germans got there, they wanted to protect it because they were going to just take over Holland and all of its collections because it's a Germanic country. And so then they moved it again to some limestone caves in the west of Holland, or I'm sorry, in the east of Holland. And that's where they took very good care of it. But to think of this huge thing rolled up is really remarkable.
Yeah. And weren't there some of them that were stored on boats in the canals?
That's right. They put some things on barges in the canals, which wasn't really too good when the planes started coming over and bombing the canals. But all those things survived, and other things were taken in France in open trucks. They had to keep moving them as the German armies advanced across France a little later, from one castle to another. The things from the Louvre, like the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa, there was a great story about that they put the Mona Lisa, since she was so special, in an ambulance on a stretcher. And in the ambulance, they put a curator with her to make sure that everything was okay. And it was so tightly sealed that the curator passed out.
Oh my God.
Had to be revived. But the Mona Lisa, she was fine.
She was fine. Oh, that's great. There, what led you to this was the fact that you were actually working in the art museum, and you just sort of ran across these stories. And
Well, I worked off and on at the National Gallery in Washington for a long time, and it was the headquarters for the organizing this protection effort and recovery effort. And a lot of the people who worked there had been involved in this sort of thing, and I realized that nobody had told their story. And it really is very remarkable, because there were only at any one time about 12 Allied officers who were responsible for all the art in Europe, which is a lot.
Yes.
And they really worked, you know, round the clock, 18, 20 hours a day to protect these things and get them back. And some of them had written books right after the war, and some had written just reports, and they were very modest. And so I started talking to them, and they started giving me their letters and everything. And it was, well, I mean, that's just like Indiana Jones, the way
Yeah.
they found things in
well, and that's
castles.
it. Locating the artwork
Yeah.
throughout the country was
Just remarkable.
It really was. Do you have an art background?
And I have more history background, but
Oh.
I did do some. I didn't get a degree in history of art, but I took a lot of courses, and I had worked in the museums, which made me very interested in the history of collections, not so much academic history of art, but you know, who'd owned a painting and where it had been, and you know, the adventures of these paintings. I mean, some of them have really been around.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember reading about some of the very wealthy Jewish families who left very significant art collections in their homes that were apparently confiscated, and most of them have not been returned.
Well, in France and Germany itself, very early on, Hitler and the Nazis started taking things from Jewish families because they were not considered citizens, and they were very careful to sort of legalize things and rationalize things in their own minds. But since the Jews were sort of non-people to them, it was all right to take their collections. And the bulk of things that were taken from Western Europe and within Germany itself were Jewish collections. And after the war, they were all gathered by these monuments officers in collecting points of things they found. And then people came from each country to try to identify them, and then within each country there were commissions that tried to find the owners. And I would say they found about 80% of the things did go back, but there's still quite a lot that's unidentified, unclaimed, and you know, the tragic thing is that probably the families just there's no one left of those families. Recently in Vienna, they had an auction of about 8,000 objects that were left over and been sitting there since the war, held by the Austrian government, and the money from that went to Jewish charities, and also to a little bit of it to Austrian resistance, some foundation that supports people who were involved in the Austrian resistance. So it was a very good thing.
Well, we're going to have to take a short break, but we'll be right back. So stay with us. Welcome back to County Line. This is June Gerard. We're talking to Lynn Nicholson, and we're discussing The Rape of Europa, which is a book that Lynn researched and wrote that tells you everything you ever wanted to know and a lot you never even thought of about what happened to great art in the world during the war of the big war, World War II. Lynn, we were talking about the fact that you felt that the Germans had taken good care of the art when they confiscated it. However, there was a section in the book that dealt with what Hitler termed degenerate art. Could you explain that?
Well, Hitler didn't like modern art for two reasons. First of all, he just didn't like it at all, and he, things that were impressionist art, and he called it unfinished art. He liked things that were very photographic and exact. And the other reason he didn't like it is that a lot of the artists were socialists or left-wing, and after World War I, they've been very critical of Germany and the whole war program. So he initiated a program to get rid of this in the German museums. And so he made a committee of Nazis, and they would go right in the museum, and they'd walk through the museum, and they'd say, that goes, that goes, that goes, and they'd just take it off the wall just like that, and the directors of the museums had nothing, nope, they couldn't do anything about it. But he didn't then burn them or, you know, have a big dramatic ceremony, which they did do with the books. They knew that these things were very valuable, so that they started selling them abroad. They had a big auction in Switzerland.
So it actually financed the German
Right,
war
and the money
machine.
went right into the German war machine, and they needed foreign currency very badly, and so some of it then they would deposit the money in London or various places. And a lot of dealers in Europe, you know, caught on to this, and they even encouraged the museums. They'd say, "Oh, why don't you deaccession that Degas or something like that?" Because
Right,
they had a
right.
customer in New York who wanted it, and so a lot of things did come to this country in that manner in the 30s and in the late 30s, and a little bit
Interesting.
later. And in the end, they did burn some things, but really they sold most of it. And the German museums have never gotten that back. It's still in other countries.
It's interesting because some time ago I read a book about Pissarro, and this was in the First World War, and Monet decided to leave Paris and asked Pissarro to hold his canvases because he lived out in the countryside and they didn't think it would be bothered. It was, and when Pissarro returned to his home, found that the Germans had used it as something to walk on because it was muddy, and all of Monet's canvases made a trail through the house.
Well, Monet's studio was hit in the Second World War by several bombs and
Really?
artillery things, and there's some accounts of the Americans, you know, visiting and seeing the beautiful yellow dining room, and so it was really quite fascinating. But I think most of it was his wife stayed there all through the war. But Pissarro, it's interesting that you mentioned, because Pissarro was Jewish, and therefore he couldn't be shown in any museum in Germany. And the Germans bought a tremendous amount of art during the war in the occupied countries, and they had big auctions that went on all the time at home. But they didn't buy Pissarro, and that was again sold to non-Germans. Very interesting.
Which
They were
brings
so
me to that
fanatic.
other group of people who were very intimately involved in this, and that's the art dealers.
Oh, yes, the art
This-
dealers made a killing during the war because the Nazis they sort of rejiggered all the finances of Europe, and the exchange rates were artificially manipulated in their favor, and they also charged the countries they were occupying for the pleasure of being, you know, of having them
Of
there.
having them there,
And
yes.
so they had a lot of money to spend, and so people would bring their grandmother's portrait out of the attic, and I mean, art sales were very, very hot. And the other thing was that nobody knew what was going to happen, and people who were black market profiteers were putting their money into things like art and gold objects and whatnot because they thought that was a good investment.
Well,
so it was a boom which really wasn't equaled until the 1980s. Just an amazing market. And there were the people made fake paintings that, I mean, just everything moved.
It really is amazing because currency was worth nothing almost, you know, during that time.
You know, it was very artificial, and no one knew what was going to happen. But they knew that a Rembrandt would always be
Would
worth
always
something.
have some value. Yeah, still does,
Still
right?
does, that's right.
There was a part in the book that dealt with Goering, who apparently was a collector of sorts. And he made a trip to Paris to look for things for his private collection.
Well, Goering was a collector of more of, you know, than sorts. He was a passionate and really obsessed collector, and he had 8 houses, and he filled them up with all kinds of art. And he collected animals. He had, you know, moose and bison that would wander around in the parks of these big houses. And he had a big pot of diamonds on his desk that he used to play with. He'd
right.
collect jewelry and everything, toy trains. But he loved pictures above all. And during the Battle of Britain, when he was, you know, in his headquarters on the coast of Holland, when he got tired, he'd come down to Paris or go to Amsterdam and go to all the art dealers and antique stores. And I mean, he bought tons of stuff, literally tons of stuff, as Hitler's agents did too. And, you know, the dealers were all quite happy to see him
I'm sure they
coming.
were. It was probably politically correct to make friends with him as well.
That's right. Well, Well, it got to be dangerous. One of the nasty aspects of this trade was that as the war went on and they started deporting Jews and and other political undesirables, you could buy your way out by selling. If you had a painting that Goering wanted, he would give you and your wife an exit visa to to get out of the occupied areas. You could go to Switzerland or Argentina. And so there was some, or they would put pressure on people and say, where is so-and-so's art collection? And so then and if you tell us, then we'll let you go. And so there were some very nasty things. And they played it to the hilt, the Nazis. They knew just where to go. They'd done a lot of research before the war. They knew where all the collections were. And
interesting. So they were well on their way.
Yeah.
And the Russians acted a little differently.
Well, the Russians, the Russians did act differently from the Western allies after the war, but there was really a reason for it, because after Hitler had eliminated the Jews, he was going to eliminate the Slavic peoples. He called them Untermenschen, non-people or lower, under people. And he was going to first make them sort of agricultural and industrial slaves, and then as they gradually died off, the pure Germans would take over that area. So the idea was to wipe out Slavic culture completely. And so in Russia, they destroyed tons and tons of things that were Russian art. They destroyed buildings, churches, so that when the Russians got to Germany, they felt that they had the right to take German objects, and actually anything they came across, German or otherwise, as compensation, and they did. They took trainloads of art and a lot of other things, machinery, everything, back to Russia with them, and they still have a lot of that. They gave back the things that belonged to Eastern satellite countries in the 50s, to East Germany and whatnot.
Yeah.
But they kept a lot of what belongs in Western Germany and Western countries. And it's still there. There's a big controversy going on now within Russia. It's very political.
About the art?
About whether they should give it back or keep it.
Well, we won't have a controversy here because we do have to give our advertisers some time. But we'll be right back, and you stay available in paperback, so you can go down to the store and discover this very interesting and untold story until now of what happened to our very precious things and artwork in the world during World War II. On the back of the book, Lynn, is a picture of the casting of Rodin's Burghers of Calais. It shows it says acquired by a German museum in 1942, and it now stands forlornly in an Allied collecting point after the war. Could you comment on that?
That's really quite a fun story, which I only found out after I'd written the book, which is sort of too bad. But this is quite a big life-size casting of the Burghers of Calais, and the Germans had bought one of the castings. Rodin did quite a number of them, and taken it back. And when the German cities were being bombed, they put all of their things in safer places too, just the way everybody else did. And one of the American officers who was trying to recover these things was assigned a certain part of Germany, and he was driving around in his Jeep and up to this castle where he had heard that there were works of art stored. And so he parked, and it was a very snowy day, and he parked his Jeep at the bottom of the hill, and he started walking up the drive, and then he noticed a group of people standing under the trees in the woods, and they all looked terribly sad. And he said, he thought to himself, this must be a funeral or something. And so he thought, how shall I do this? And so, but he kept going, and of course it turned out it was the Burghers of Calais, which were sitting under a tree. It was the group. And so that's how he found them and how they were recovered. And this sort of thing happened, that these officers found works of art in every conceivable kind of situation, in cowsheds and old basements and things like that.
So it really is truly an amazing
over
story.
2,000 hiding places where they found things, and of course there are places that they didn't find and things that were never recovered. And I think one of the most famous missing ones still is the Amber Room, which is huge
yes.
panels which were taken off of the walls of a palace outside of St. Petersburg, and they're made of thin slices of amber. It's sort of put together the way stained glass is, and they were taken by the Nazis and hidden in Kaliningrad, or Königsberg it was called then, and they were never found at the end of the war. And people go around all the time now, treasure hunters with, you know, those metal detectors and everything. Everybody's
find them.
trying
You
to
think
find
they're
them.
buried?
Nobody's found any trace.
They're probably in someone's private collection.
Well, they're very big. They were in 29 big cases. So if you have some big cases in your attic that your father brought home, then that's,
Better
you know,
go check that out,
check
right?
that out. But I think they probably are at the bottom of the Baltic, because this was a port city, and the Germans
Yes.
would have tried probably to take them, you know, by sea, because by then they were pretty surrounded by the Russian armies. But they belonged to Russia, and so
the
if you
St. Catherine Palace.
Yeah.
Well, in the couple of minutes that we have left, what are your new projects?
Well, I'm working on another World War II book,
Are
and this
you?
time not about art, but about children who were caught up in the war. So I think that it'll be a whole different approach, but a lot of them are people I met as a result of doing interviews for this book. So that'll take a little while. And then I'm also doing a project on Napoleon's looting, and he was runs Hitler a close second. But at that time, you know, the early 19th century, a lot of people were going around trying to take things from one country to another. I think the most famous thing is the Elgin marbles, the Parthenon marbles, which are now in London.
Yes.
But of course, the French and the British were, that's, you know, really competing for that one. So these stories don't end. They've gone on since time
And
immemorial.
actually, in the British Museum, there's almost more Greek art than there
Yes,
is in
that's
Greece. I think, that they managed to
That's right.
squirrel
Well,
away.
Melina McCurry was after it, but she hasn't, you know, managed to get it, or she didn't get it back, and the Greeks still make
Well, I think
noises.
they're still trying
Oh,
to
they're
get
still
it back.
trying. They're still trying.
Yeah. Well, that will be a very interesting book to read as well. Thank you so much
Well,
for
thank you for
joining
having
County
me.
Line and for being here with us today.
It's
And
lovely to be here.
we are going to look forward to your new book, and in the meantime, we're going to look for The Rape of Europa, because that in itself is a fascinating story.
Thank you. Yes.
Very, very good.
How many of you here have seen the Night Watch in Amsterdam? Okay, so you know how big it is. And the fact that they were able to get that and roll it into a carpet and leave it on a boat sitting in the canal through the whole World War II, I thought was an incredible story. The other one that I thought about was the Three Burgers. I don't know how many you've seen it in the museums, but it's a sculpture of like the mayor and the city council. There's three men standing in a corner having a discussion. They took that sculpture and put it out in the farmland, just standing in a field for the whole of the World War II, and nobody realized that it was an art piece. It looked like three men standing in a farm area. It's an incredible story and a wonderful book. If you're interested in getting it, you should look for it in the library. It's really wonderful. Any questions? No, everybody's happy? Okay, thank you very much. I think Ron has some comment.
Right. Next week, as you know, we're still recovering a little bit on the schedule wise from the storm cancellations. Next week, we're going to put something new together for you. I know you'll enjoy it. I don't know exactly what it'll be yet, but we'll see you here next Thursday afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Oh, I forgot to tell you that we have an angel amongst us, and I don't know. This angel has managed to take care of every problem that ever existed, I think, at Okemic, and that's our Dick Martin, I have to say. Thank you. Okay, that's it. I got that. Yeah.